Failure has a sound. It sounds like quiet laughter from the next room. It sounds like your name spoken in a tone that already expects the worst. And that night, I heard both. The house was full. Weekend dinner at my parents' place always brought everyone together. Plates clattered in the kitchen, voices overlapped in the living room, and the familiar warmth of family filled every corner. At least that's how it looked from the outside. I had just stepped into the hallway when I heard my name. Not loudly, not directly, but clearly enough. My cousin was the first voice I recognized. He said I would probably try something new again this year. Something big, something ambitious. Then he laughed. Another voice followed, softer but sharper. My aunt. She said I always start strong but never finish anything. That it was only a matter of time before I failed again. A small pause. Then my brother spoke. He didn't laugh. He just said it was predictable. That word landed harder than the others. Predictable. Like my life followed a pattern they had already figured out. Then came the part that changed everything. My father's voice. Calm. Measured. Certain. He said they should make it interesting this time. A bet. The room grew quieter, like everyone leaned in just a little closer. He suggested they guess how long it would take before I gave up on my next attempt. A week. A month. Maybe 3 if I was really committed. Laughter followed. Not loud. Not cruel. Just confident. Like the outcome was already decided. I stood there in the hallway, completely still. They thought I wasn't home yet. They thought I couldn't hear them. And for a moment, I almost walked away. Almost pretended I never heard it. Because this wasn't new. I had tried things before. Big ideas. New directions. Some worked for a while. Some didn't. And every time something failed, they remembered it. More than anything else. But tonight felt different. Not because of what they said. Because of what I knew. I stepped into the dining room a few minutes later like nothing had happened. Smiled. Greeted everyone. Took my usual seat. No one suspected anything. Dinner started. Conversations flowed. And across the table, my father looked at me like he always did. Calm. Unconcerned. Certain. Like he already knew how my story would end. I let them talk. I let them believe. Because for the first time, I wasn't walking into another attempt. I was walking into the moment I had been preparing for in silence. And the secret I carried tonight wasn't another risk. It was a result. Because before this dinner was over, the same people betting on my failure were going to realize they had already lost. Dinner settled into its usual rhythm. Plates passed from one side of the table to the other. Someone joked about traffic. My aunt complained about rising prices. My cousin scrolled through his phone between bites, barely paying attention to anything unless it involved him. On the surface, it was normal. But I heard everything differently now. Every comment carried weight. Every look meant more. Because I knew what they had said before I walked in. Across the table, my father asked a casual question. He wanted to know what I had been working on lately. The timing was deliberate. He leaned back slightly, fork resting on his plate, waiting. The entire table shifted their attention toward me. I could feel it. Not curiosity. Expectation. The same pattern as always. They were waiting to hear about another attempt. Another idea. Another plan they could quietly measure against their assumptions. I gave them exactly what they expected. I shrugged slightly and said I had been working on something new. Nothing too detailed. Nothing too impressive. Just enough to confirm their belief. My cousin smirked almost immediately. My aunt exchanged a quick glance with my mother. And my brother gave a small nod, like the outcome had already been confirmed. Predictable. The word echoed again in my mind. My father asked how it was going. His tone stayed neutral, but there was something underneath it. A quiet test. I told him it was still early. Still developing. That answer landed exactly how I expected. The energy at the table shifted slightly. Subtle, but clear. Interest dropped. The conversation began moving away from me almost instantly, drifting back toward safer topics. Safer people. I let it happen. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push. Because this part mattered. Letting them feel right. Letting them believe their assumptions were accurate. that I was still the same person they had quietly bet against in the other room. Minutes passed. Laughter returned. Plates emptied. And slowly, the moment they had been waiting for began to fade. That was when I noticed something else. My father reached for his glass and glanced briefly toward my brother. A small look. Quick, but intentional. My brother gave a slight nod in return. It was subtle, but I understood it. They had already made their guesses. The bet was real, and they believed they had already won. I leaned back in my chair, completely calm, because what they didn't know is that I had been playing along the entire time. Every answer, every reaction, every moment of silence, all part of letting them settle into their certainty. Because certainty is dangerous. It makes people stop questioning, stop paying attention. And that is exactly when the truth hits the hardest. I glanced toward the end of the table where my bag rested against the chair leg. Inside it sat something none of them expected. Something I had carried into this house without a single person noticing. Something that would end their little game instantly. But not yet. Timing mattered. And the moment wasn't ready. Because the real reason I came to this dinner wasn't to talk about what I was working on. It was to show them what I had already finished. Dessert came out a little earlier than usual. My mother placed the plates on the table with a quiet sense of routine, unaware of the tension building underneath the surface. The smell of warm apple pie filled the room, softening the atmosphere for everyone except me. I wasn't tasting anything. I was watching. Across the table, my cousin leaned back in his chair, relaxed now. The earlier curiosity about my plans had completely disappeared. In his mind, the story was already written. Another attempt. Another slow start. Another predictable ending. My aunt followed the same pattern, shifting the conversation toward safer topics, carefully avoiding anything that might give me space to speak again. Even my brother had stopped paying attention. That was the part that stood out the most. Not the doubt. The disinterest. Because to them, I wasn't worth focusing on until something went wrong. And they believed it would. My father finally spoke again. He asked one more question. Casual. Almost routine. He wanted to know if I had set any goals this time. The table quieted just enough for everyone to listen. I looked at him calmly and gave a small smile. I said I was taking things one step at a time. The reaction was immediate. Not loud. Not obvious. But it was there. My cousin let out a quiet laugh. My aunt nodded slightly, as if that answer confirmed everything she already believed. Even my brother exhaled softly, like he had just heard something expected. Predictable. Again. I let the moment settle. I let them feel comfortable in their assumptions. Because comfort makes people careless. And careless people don't see what's coming next. My father picked up his glass again, his expression unchanged, but I noticed the faint satisfaction in his posture. The bet was still alive. And in his mind, still safe. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just a little longer than usual. Then I reached down. Slowly. Deliberately. My hand moved toward the bag resting beside my chair. No one reacted at first. Why would they? To them, this was just another small movement in an unimportant moment. But this was the moment. The shift. The exact point where everything changed. My fingers wrapped around the handle of the bag. I lifted it onto my lap. Now a few eyes turned toward me. Not with concern. Just mild curiosity. Still not enough. Still not serious. I unzipped it slowly. The sound was quiet. But in that silence, it carried. My father's gaze sharpened slightly. My brother looked up again. My aunt paused mid-bite. They felt it. Not understanding it yet, but sensing it. I reached inside and pulled out the first piece. A document. Clean. Professional. Folded neatly. I placed it on the table in front of me. And for the first time that night, I didn't wait for them to ask. Because what I was about to say next wasn't another plan. It was proof that their bet had already failed. The document sat in front of me, untouched for a few seconds. No one reached for it. Not yet. Because something in the air had shifted, and they could feel it even if they didn't understand why. My father was the first to break the silence. He leaned forward slightly and asked what it was. His tone stayed calm, but the confidence underneath it had weakened. Just a little. Enough for me to notice. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I unfolded the paper slowly and turned it so everyone at the table could see. Clean formatting. Official letterhead. A company name printed across the top that carried more weight than anything I had ever mentioned at this table before. My cousin leaned in first, his earlier smirk fading into confusion. My aunt followed, squinting slightly as she tried to read the details. My brother straightened in his chair. And my father. My father went completely still. Because he recognized the company instantly. Everyone in that room did. A national firm. Competitive. Selective. The kind of place people talked about but rarely got into. The kind of place they never expected me to reach. I let the silence stretch as their eyes moved across the page. Then I spoke. I said it wasn't a plan. It wasn't an idea. It wasn't something I was trying. It was an offer. The word landed hard. My mother set her fork down slowly. My cousin leaned closer. My aunt's expression shifted completely. And my father. He didn't move at all. Because at the bottom of that page, just above the signature line, sat something none of them expected to see. My name, printed clearly, followed by a position title. Not entry-level. Not temporary. A role that required experience, skill, and proof of results. Everything they believed I didn't have. The room stayed quiet. No laughter this time. No casual comments. Just the slow realization that something they had already dismissed was standing right in front of them. My brother was the first to react. He asked how long I had been working on this. His voice carried something new. Uncertainty. I looked at him calmly. Months. Not weeks. Not days. Months of preparation, interviews, evaluations, and decisions that happened long before tonight. My cousin leaned back in his chair, clearly trying to process it. My aunt looked at my mother, waiting for some kind of explanation. But my mother didn't have one. Because this wasn't something they had seen coming. My father finally reached for the document. His hand paused just slightly before touching it. A small hesitation. But it mattered. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't sure. He lifted the paper and read it more carefully. Line by line. Detail by detail. And with every second, the certainty he carried earlier in the night began to disappear. I watched him quietly. Because this moment wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about showing them something they never considered possible. The person they bet against had already moved forward without them. And the truth sitting in his hands was only the beginning. Because what my father didn't realize yet was that the offer wasn't the biggest secret I brought to this table. My father kept reading the document longer than anyone else. The rest of the table watched him, waiting for a reaction that didn't come immediately. His expression stayed controlled, but the silence from him said more than any words could. Because this wasn't something he could dismiss. Not easily. Not this time. My cousin finally spoke, his voice quieter now. He asked if the offer was real. I looked at him and nodded once. Simple. Clear. No hesitation. My aunt leaned forward, asking what the position involved. Her tone had changed completely. The casual doubt from earlier was gone, replaced by something closer to curiosity. Respect hadn't arrived yet, but it was moving in that direction. I explained briefly. The role involved strategy, project leadership, and long-term planning. It wasn't something handed out lightly. It required results. Proven results. My brother looked at me differently now. Not dismissive. Not certain. Just trying to understand how much he had missed. My mother finally spoke again, her voice softer than before. She asked why I never told anyone. That question almost made me smile. Because the answer was simple. I didn't tell them because they never really asked. Not seriously. Not in a way that made space for something real. They asked out of habit. Out of routine. And they listened with expectations already in place. So I gave them exactly what they expected to hear. Until tonight. My father lowered the paper slowly and placed it back on the table. His eyes met mine. And for the first time that evening, there was no certainty in them. Only calculation. He asked when I received the offer. I told him earlier that morning. Technically true, but incomplete. Because the process that led to that offer had started long before today. Long before this dinner. Long before the bet. My cousin shifted in his seat again, clearly uncomfortable now. My aunt stayed quiet. My brother leaned back, thinking. The entire table felt different. The balance had changed. And they could feel it. But they still didn't know everything. Not yet. I reached into my bag again. The movement was slower this time. More deliberate. Because the next part mattered even more than the first. My father noticed immediately. His attention sharpened again, but this time it carried something new. Concern. Because he understood now. The document on the table had already broken their assumptions. But it wasn't the full story. I pulled out a second item. Smaller. Thinner. But far more important. I placed it beside the first document. And, just like before, I didn't wait for them to ask. Because the job offer proved I didn't fail. But the next thing I was about to show them would prove how wrong they had been all along. The second item didn't look impressive at first. No bold letterhead. No official stamp. Just a thin document, neatly organized, clipped together with a simple binder. But appearances can be misleading. My father noticed the difference immediately. His eyes moved from the offer letter to the new papers, trying to understand how they connected. My cousin leaned forward again, curiosity replacing the earlier doubt. My aunt stayed quiet, watching closely now. My brother didn't move at all, but his attention was locked on the table. My mother looked uncertain. Because this part felt different. More personal. More revealing. I opened the document and turned it toward them. Rows of numbers. Charts. Clean summaries. The kind of information most people overlook until they realize what it represents. At the top sat a title. Portfolio Summary. The room stayed silent. I explained it calmly. While they focused on what I might fail at, I focused on something else. Building. Not one big idea. Not one risky attempt. But multiple streams. Investments. Projects. Contracts. Each one small at first. Each one growing over time. My cousin frowned slightly, trying to follow. My aunt leaned in closer, reading the figures more carefully. My brother's posture changed. He understood numbers. And he was starting to see the pattern. My father didn't speak. He just kept reading. Line by line. Category by category. Then he reached the final page. The summary. The total. His hand paused for just a second. A small reaction. But enough. Because that number was not what he expected. Not even close. My mother noticed his expression and stepped closer. She read the final line. Then looked at me. Then back at the paper. Her face shifted slowly as the realization settled in. This wasn't just stable. It wasn't just successful. It was significant. Years of quiet work, stacked together without anyone at this table paying attention. My cousin leaned back again, this time without a smirk. My aunt stopped asking questions. My brother exhaled slowly, almost like he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. My father finally placed the document back on the table. Carefully. Deliberately. The same man who joked about how long I would last now had to face something undeniable. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't luck. This wasn't another attempt. This was consistency. Built-in silence. I looked at him calmly. Because this moment wasn't about proving a point. It was about showing a pattern they never noticed. The same way they noticed every failure. But ignored every step forward. The room felt different now. Not quiet from disinterest. Quiet from impact. But there was still one thing they didn't understand. One final detail that tied everything together. And that detail was about to change how they saw me completely. Because the numbers proved I succeeded. But the real truth was how long I had been winning. Without any of them realizing it. The table stayed quiet after the numbers settled in. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to explain it away. The weight of what they had just seen held the room in place. My father sat back slightly, his posture no longer relaxed. For the first time that night, he looked like someone trying to understand a situation he no longer controlled. My mother kept glancing between the documents, her expression caught between disbelief and realization. My cousin avoided eye contact completely. My aunt said nothing. My brother was the only one still studying the pages closely, like he was searching for something deeper. That was when I reached for the final piece. Not a document. Not numbers. Something simpler. I pulled out a small printed timeline. Clean. Straightforward. Easy to follow. I placed it in the center of the table. At first, no one reacted. Then my father leaned forward again. Slowly. Carefully. Because he understood now that nothing I brought out tonight was random. Everything had a purpose. His eyes moved across the timeline. Dates. Milestones. Small entries at the beginning. Larger ones as it progressed. The pattern was clear. But the timing was what mattered most. Because those early entries started years ago. Before my last failed attempt. Before the one they still talked about. Before the one they used as proof that I would always fall short. My father's expression shifted again. He looked up at me briefly, then back at the page. My mother leaned closer, following the same path. My cousin slowly turned his head back toward the table. My aunt finally spoke under her breath, almost to herself. She said this had been going on longer than anyone knew. Exactly. That was the point. While they remembered every failure, they ignored everything that came after it. The small wins. The quiet progress. The consistency that didn't make noise. My brother tapped lightly on one of the dates. He asked about it. I explained. That was the moment I stopped chasing big, visible success. And started building something sustainable. Step by step. Without announcing it. Without asking for attention. Without needing validation. The timeline showed everything they never noticed. Not because it was hidden. Because they never looked. My father sat back again, the paper still in his hands. His earlier certainty had completely disappeared now. In its place sat something else. Recognition. Not just of what I had done, but of what they had missed. The bet from earlier in the night felt distant now. Small. Almost irrelevant. Because the person they bet against had already moved far beyond that moment. I looked around the table slowly. Every face had changed. Different expressions. Different thoughts. But one shared realization. They didn't know me the way they thought they did. And that realization carried more weight than anything else I had shown them. But there was still one final step. One last thing that would close the gap completely. And it wasn't about proof. It was about truth. Because the timeline showed when I started winning. But the final thing I was about to say would show why I never told them. The room felt smaller now. Not physically, but in a way that made every word carry more weight than before. The documents on the table, the numbers, the timeline, all of it had already changed how they saw me. But there was still something left unsaid. Something none of them had asked. I looked at each of them slowly before speaking. Not to prove anything. Not to impress anyone. Just to finish what I started. I said the reason I never told them wasn't because I wanted to hide anything. It was because I already knew how they would respond. The silence deepened. My father didn't interrupt. My mother didn't question. For the first time, they listened without expectations. I explained it simply. Every time I tried something before, the focus wasn't on what I learned or what I built. It was on whether I failed. And when something didn't work, that moment became the story. The only story. So I stopped sharing early. Stopped explaining plans. Stopped asking for opinions. Because I realized something important. Support that depends on success is not support. It is approval. And approval disappears the moment things get difficult. My cousin shifted uncomfortably. My aunt lowered her gaze. My brother stayed still. My father remained silent. I continued. I said I didn't need them to believe in me anymore. I needed space to figure things out without being measured against their expectations. And once I had that space, everything changed. The risks became smarter. The decisions became clearer. The results became consistent. Not because I was different, but because I stopped performing for them. That was the part they never saw. Not the work. Not the results. The shift. My mother's eyes softened slightly, like she was replaying moments in her head. My father finally spoke. His voice was quieter than before. He said they never realized it affected me that way. I nodded. That was exactly it. They never realized. The bet earlier in the night wasn't cruel. It was casual. Normal. That was what made it worse. Because it showed how little they expected from me without even thinking about it. I looked at the table one last time. At the papers. at the proof, at everything I had brought into this room. Then I said the final thing. I didn't come tonight to prove them wrong. I came because I no longer needed their approval. The words settled in slowly. No drama. No raised voices. Just truth. And sometimes that hits harder than anything else. I stood up from my chair. Not to leave. Not to escape. Just to end the moment on my terms. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the person they expected me to be. Not the one who fails. Not the one they bet against. Just someone who built something real without needing them to notice. And now that they finally did, it didn't matter anymore. Because the biggest revenge wasn't proving them wrong. It was winning long enough that their opinions stopped mattering completely. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more interesting betrayal stories. See you in the next one.